The year was 1974. A handsome, well-spoken young man with dark, wavy hair sat in a quiet library, smiling at a college student. He wore a cast on his arm and asked for help carrying his books to his car. She hesitated, but he seemed harmless, polite, trustworthy. She was never seen alive again. This was Ted Bundy. Not a monster lurking in alleys, but the man next door, a law student, a crisis hotline volunteer, a man who charmed his victims before slaughtering them. And for years, no one suspected a thing. It started with a missing girl. The house on 12th Avenue was quiet when Linda Ann Healy's roommates woke on January 4th, 1974. The 21-year-old psychology student's alarm had been ringing incessantly. An unusual occurrence for the punctual honor student. When they entered her basement bedroom, they found the bed empty, but the sheets stained with rust-colored splotches. The window screen had been cleanly cut and bent outward, as if someone had entered, taken Linda, and exited without disturbing the rest of the house. Her purse and identification remained neatly arranged on her dresser. The radio was still playing softly. It would be months before investigators understood this was no ordinary disappearance. It was the first stroke of a killer's masterpiece. On the evening of February 1st, Evergreen State College student Donna Gail Manson told her dorm mates she was heading to a jazz concert on campus. The 19-year-old music lover bundled up against the winter chill in her pea coat, her violin case tucked under her arm. A security guard later reported seeing a young woman matching Donna's description, walking alone across the darkened parking lot near the library. Then, nothing. Her violin was found neatly placed near a campus pathway, as if carefully set down rather than dropped. The concert went on without her. When her worried friends reported her missing, campus police initially suggested she'd gone off with a boyfriend. They would never find a single witness who saw Donna after that final walk across the quad. Susan Elaine Rancourt was the kind of student who always arrived early. On March 12th, the 18-year-old Central Washington University freshman left her dorm at 8:15 p.m. for the short walk to the library. Surveillance footage showed her crossing the brightly lit courtyard, her arms full of textbooks. Then the footage ended. The library's security cameras malfunctioned that night, a coincidence that would later seem suspicious. Susan never reached the library doors. Her textbooks were later found stacked neatly on a bench along her usual path, her student ID placed carefully on top as if marking her last known location. Campus security found no signs of struggle, just a trail of ordinary objects left behind by a girl who vanished between streetlights. Roberta Kathleen Parks was running late for her evening class at Oregon State University on April the 17th when a handsome stranger pulled up in a light brown Volkswagen Beetle. Multiple witnesses saw the 22-year-old leaning into the passenger window, engaged in animated conversation. One student later recalled the driver looked like a grad student, glasses, neatly trimmed hair, an earnest expression. Roberta smiled as she climbed into the car, tossing her book bag in the back seat. The Volkswagen drove off toward campus. Roberta never arrived at her classroom. When police later searched the route, they found her notebook lying in a gutter, its pages fluttering in the spring breeze. The only trace of her left behind. The Flamingo Club was emptying out when Brenda Carroll Ball clocked out at 2:15 a.m. on May 6th. The 22-year-old waitress waved goodbye to coworkers, joking about needing to study for her community college exams. A regular customer later reported seeing Brenda in the parking lot, lighting a cigarette as she waited for her ride. Then headlights approached. When detectives interviewed staff the next day, they discovered Brenda had never made it home. Her remains were found months later in the Issaquah Highlands, scattered among the ferns and cedar trees. The medical examiner would note something chilling. The bones showed signs of having been carefully cleaned before disposal. George Ann Hawkins was laughing with friends on the University of Washington's Greek Row when she said goodnight on June 1st. The 18-year-old sorority sister had only 3 blocks to walk to her chapter house. A neighbor later reported seeing Georgianne stopped on the sidewalk, talking to a tall young man wearing an arm cast. He was asking for help carrying some law books to his car. The witness recalled. He seemed so polite. Georgianne's purse was found the next morning in a nearby alley, its contents meticulously arranged on the pavement. Wallet, keys, and a tube of lipstick placed in a straight line, as if displayed for investigators to find. Like the others, Georgianne herself was gone without a trace. The emerging pattern was impossible to ignore. All the victims were bright, attractive college women, between 18 and 22 years old. They vanished from locations where young people congregated: campuses, libraries, bars, places where someone could observe potential victims without drawing suspicion. Most disturbing were the reports of a clean-cut, articulate young man who sometimes appeared injured, using his apparent vulnerability to gain trust before striking. Yet despite these alarming similarities, law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions failed to connect the cases. With no bodies recovered, no clear crime scenes, and no physical evidence, the disappearances remained frustrating mysteries. The killer moved through the Pacific Northwest like a ghost, leaving behind only grief-stricken families and a growing sense of dread among young women who suddenly saw potential danger in every parking lot, every friendly stranger, every darkened walk home. The story of Ted Bundy begins not with the bloodshed that would later define him, but with a childhood shrouded in deception and instability. Born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, Bundy entered a world where the very foundation of his identity was a lie. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was unmarried and just 22 years old when she gave birth, a scandal in post-war America. To avoid stigma, Bundy was raised to believe his grandparents were his parents and that his real mother was his older sister. This fabricated family dynamic warped his sense of self from the start. The absence of his biological father, a man Bundy would never know, left a void filled with whispers and suspicion. Some family members later claimed Bundy's grandfather, Samuel Cowell, was a tyrannical figure prone to violent outbursts, with rumors even suggesting he may have abused young Ted. Whether true or not, the household was steeped in secrecy and simmering tension, a breeding ground for the fractured psyche that would later emerge. If Bundy's childhood laid the groundwork for his pathology, it was a failed romance that cemented it. In 1967, while attending the University of Washington, he met Stephanie Brooks, a wealthy, strikingly beautiful woman from an affluent California family. Brooks embodied everything Bundy coveted: sophistication, class, and an untouchable allure. Their relationship was brief, ending when Brooks, unimpressed by Bundy's lack of ambition, coldly cut ties. The rejection ignited something dark in Bundy. Humiliated and enraged, he became obsessed with brunettes who mirrored Stephanie's appearance. Women with long, middle-parted hair, delicate features, and an air of refinement. Years later, when his killing spree began, nearly all his victims would bear an uncanny resemblance to Brooks. Some were even the same age she had been when she left him. This fixation wasn't just about revenge, it was about control. Where Brooks had rejected him, Bundy now ensured his chosen victims would never have the chance. He would decide their fate. This was just the beginning. The invisible predator was refining his methods, growing bolder with each success, and the worst was yet to come. The Pacific Northwest's nightmare had only just begun. For months, Ted Bundy had moved through the Pacific Northwest with terrifying efficiency, his crimes following a disturbingly consistent pattern. Young women would vanish during the most ordinary moments, walking to class, leaving a library, or heading home from work, disappearing without witnesses or struggle. The only traces left behind were carefully placed personal items, arranged with chilling precision that hinted at a killer who took pride in his work. Law enforcement across multiple jurisdictions remained unaware they were dealing with the same predator, their investigations fragmented as the body count quietly grew. No one yet realized these were the opening moves of what would become one of America's most notorious crime sprees, or that the polite, well-dressed man, occasionally seen wearing an arm cast, would soon become the most recognizable serial killer in history. By late summer of 1974, cracks began appearing in Bundy's carefully constructed facade. The first major breach came on July 14th, when 18-year-old Carol Duranch narrowly escaped his clutches in a Salt Lake City Mall parking lot. Posing as a police officer, Bundy had approached her about a reported theft, attempting to handcuff her and force her into his Volkswagen. When she resisted, he drove erratically while she fought desperately inside the moving vehicle before throwing herself out onto the pavement, becoming the first known survivor of an encounter with the Phantom Killer who had been terrorizing the region. This near miss coincided with increasing media attention that Bundy couldn't control. Newspapers throughout Washington and Oregon began running alarming stories about the so-called co-ed killer, publishing composite sketches based on witness descriptions. Police departments that had previously worked in isolation started sharing information, slowly recognizing the disturbing connections between cases across state lines. Most damning were the multiple independent reports of a light brown Volkswagen Beetle spotted near various abduction sites, a detail that would eventually lead investigators directly to Bundy's doorstep. The turning point came on August 16, 1974, during a routine traffic stop in Granger, Utah. Patrol officer Bob Hayward noticed a light brown Volkswagen Beetle driving slowly through his neighborhood at 2:30 a.m., its driver appearing nervous. When Hayward ran the license plate, alarm bells went off. The vehicle matched descriptions from multiple unsolved abduction cases in Washington and Oregon. As Bundy sat sweating behind the wheel, the officer conducted a search of the car, discovering suspicious items, including a crowbar, rope, handcuffs, and an ice pick, a veritable toolkit for abduction and murder. Though released due to lack of concrete evidence, Bundy knew the game had changed. The hunter had suddenly become vulnerable, his carefully maintained anonymity compromised. Most criminals would have fled or laid low, but Bundy's psychopathy drove him in the opposite direction. Within days of the traffic stop, he began scouting new hunting grounds in Utah, his ego demanding he prove he could outsmart law enforcement. This decision to escalate rather than retreat marked a critical psychological shift. Where Bundy had previously been meticulous in covering his tracks, he now grew reckless, almost daring authorities to catch him. His crimes became more brazen, his victim selection broader, and his methods more violent. The Utah killings would show a predator shedding the last vestiges of restraint, driven by both the thrill of evasion and a deepening bloodlust that would ultimately lead to his downfall. This period reveals the fatal flaw in Bundy's psychology. His belief in his own superiority became so inflated that it blinded him to the growing web of evidence tightening around him. The traffic stop that should have been his wake-up call instead became the catalyst for an even deadlier chapter in his killing spree. The summer of 1974 marked a turning point for Ted Bundy, as the disappearances of Linda Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, and others generated increasing media attention across Washington and Oregon. With newspapers dubbing the unknown predator the co-ed killer, Bundy recognized the Pacific Northwest had become too dangerous for his operations. Always calculating, he made the strategic decision to relocate, packing his light brown Volkswagen Beetle and heading southeast to Utah. Salt Lake City offered fresh hunting grounds. Its sprawling university campuses and quiet suburban streets filled with potential victims who wouldn't be connected to his previous crimes. His first known Utah victim was 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox, who vanished on October 2, after leaving a friend's house in Holiday. Unlike his typical college-age targets, Nancy was younger, signaling an expansion of his victim selection. When her purse was found neatly placed near a bus stop days later, it bore the same disturbing hallmarks of his earlier crimes. Personal items arranged with deliberate care. Yet this time, the killer seemed to be leaving a more visible trail. The murder of 17-year-old Melissa Smith on October 18th represented an even more dramatic escalation. As the daughter of Midvale's police chief, her abduction shattered any illusion of safety in the community. When hunters discovered her naked, battered body in the Wasatch Mountains 10 days later, the autopsy revealed the horrifying truth. She had been kept alive for days before being strangled, with evidence of prolonged sexual assault. This wasn't just murder, it was torture, a stark departure from Bundy's previous methods of quick kills and hidden bodies. On Halloween night, another teenager disappeared. 17-year-old Laura Amy was last seen hitchhiking home from a party in Lehigh. When her decomposing body was found, weeks later in a remote canyon, stripped naked with her clothing never recovered, investigators realized the killer was taking trophies. Another disturbing evolution in his behavior. The Utah murders marked a significant shift in Bundy's modus operandi, where he had once carefully concealed his victims' bodies in Washington and Oregon. He now left them exposed in open areas, almost as if daring authorities to find them. The crimes became more violent, more personal, with evidence suggesting he was spending extended time with his victims before killing them. This wasn't just about murder anymore. It was about control, domination, and the sick satisfaction of watching an entire region live in fear. Yet despite the growing body count and changing patterns, Utah authorities failed to connect these killings to the Pacific Northwest cases. They viewed each tragedy in isolation: a runaway teen, a police chief's daughter, a hitchhiker who made a fatal mistake. No one yet pieced together the most crucial clue. Multiple witnesses in both regions reported seeing a handsome young man driving a light brown Volkswagen Beetle near the disappearance sites. The evidence was there, scattered across police reports in different states, waiting for someone to recognize the pattern that would eventually lead them to one of America's most notorious serial killers. As Bundy expanded his killing grounds into Utah and Colorado, his methods underwent a disturbing evolution. Gone were the carefully planned ruses of the Pacific Northwest killings, where he had posed as an injured man needing assistance or a friendly stranger to gain his victim's trust. In their place emerged brutal blitz attacks, sudden violent ambushes that left no time for screams or struggle. Strangulation became his signature, allowing him to exert complete control over his victims in their final moments. Autopsies would later reveal even more horrifying details. Post-mortem violations that showed Bundy's crimes were escalating in both violence and depravity. The winter of 1975 found Bundy prowling Colorado's ski resorts, where young women vacationing in the snowy mountains made easy targets. On January 12th, 23-year-old Corinne Campbell vanished from the Wildwood Inn at Snowmass Ski Resort, where she was staying with her fiancé's family. Witnesses reported seeing a handsome, well-dressed man lingering near the lobby that evening. 5 weeks later, her body was discovered just off the roadside, her skull crushed by multiple blows from a heavy object. The crime scene showed signs of a frenzied, brutal attack, unlike his more methodical earlier murders. As the snow melted in March, Bundy struck again. On the 15th, 26-year-old nurse Julie Cunningham left her apartment in Vail to meet friends at a local bar. She never arrived. Witnesses reported seeing a man matching Bundy's description talking to a woman near where Julie was last seen. Despite extensive searches, Julie's body was never recovered, though investigators believe Bundy likely disposed of it in one of the many remote mountain areas he had come to know well during his time in Colorado. The pattern continued into spring. On April 6, 25-year-old Denise Oliverson disappeared while hitchhiking in Grand Junction. Her body was later found dumped near the Colorado River, bearing the telltale signs of Bundy's evolving methods, manual strangulation marks, and evidence of post-mortem interference. The once careful killer, who had hidden his victims' bodies, was now leaving them in places where they would certainly be found, a chilling indication of his growing boldness. These Colorado murders marked a new level of brutality in Bundy's killing spree. The ski resort setting represented a shift in his hunting grounds, while the increased violence suggested a killer losing control of his carefully constructed facade. Where he had once taken pride in his meticulous planning, he now seemed driven by raw, uncontrolled urges, a dangerous development that would ultimately contribute to his capture, but not before claiming more innocent lives. As the body count grew across multiple states, a disturbing pattern finally began emerging in police reports that had previously been kept separate by jurisdictional boundaries. Investigators comparing notes started noticing eerie similarities that pointed to a single, mobile predator. Witness statements from Washington to Utah to Colorado consistently mentioned sightings of a light brown Volkswagen Beetle in the vicinity of disappearances, a vehicle often seen cruising near college campuses or parked suspiciously at the edges of crime scenes. More troubling was the victim profile that became impossible to ignore. Nearly all were petite young women between 18 and 26 years old, with slender builds, brunette hair parted neatly down the middle, and strikingly similar facial features. The absence of struggle at abduction sites particularly unnerved detectives. No torn clothing, no dropped belongings scattered in panic, just empty spaces where vibrant young women had last been seen. This suggested a killer who either approached his victims with such charm they went willingly, or struck with such sudden violence they had no chance to react. The emerging pattern painted a portrait of a predator who didn't just kill randomly, but hunted with a specific type in mind, returning again and again to the same physical ideal, like an artist obsessed with perfecting a particular portrait of death. Yet despite these mounting connections, the lack of physical evidence and Bundy's ability to cross state lines continued to frustrate investigators, allowing America's most methodical serial killer to remain one step ahead for now. The night of January 15, 1978, marked Ted Bundy's most brazen and savage attack, a departure from his usual careful methodology that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Under cover of darkness, he slipped into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, moving through the sleeping residents with terrifying purpose. The first victim, 20-year-old Lisa Levy, never had a chance to wake before Bundy bludgeoned her skull with a heavy log from the fireplace, fracturing it in multiple places with such force that brain matter was later found splattered across the walls. In the same room, 21-year-old Margaret Bowman was strangled with such brutal intensity that the medical examiner would discover her hyoid bone, a delicate U-shaped neck bone, completely shattered, a rare injury seen only in cases of extreme manual strangulation. Down the hall, Bundy attacked two more sleeping women, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, beating them savagely with the same log, though both would miraculously survive their horrific injuries. But it was what he did to Lisa Levy's body after her death that would become one of the most damning pieces of evidence against him. In a grotesque act of depravity, Bundy bit Lisa's left buttock hard enough to leave distinct dental impressions in her flesh, an arrogant, almost taunting signature that revealed his escalating loss of control. When forensic odontologists later matched these bite marks to Bundy's distinctive crooked teeth with unprecedented accuracy, it became one of the first uses of bite mark analysis in a major criminal trial, sealing his fate with scientific certainty. The sorority house massacre represented Bundy at his most unhinged. No longer the careful predator who made victims disappear without a trace, but a frenzied killer leaving behind a trail of blood, teeth marks, and surviving witnesses who could identify him. The abduction of Kimberly Leach marked the final chilling chapter in Ted Bundy's killing spree, a crime so brazen it would finally seal his fate. On the morning of February 9, 1978, the 12-year-old was last seen outside her junior high school in Lake City, Florida, where witnesses reported a man in a white van lingering near the campus. Unlike Bundy's previous victims, college-aged women, Kimberly was just a child, signaling his complete descent into indiscriminate savagery. Her disappearance triggered a statewide manhunt, but it wasn't until weeks later that hunters stumbled upon a gruesome discovery in a remote, dilapidated pig shed near the Suwannee River. Kimberly's small, partially decomposed body lay inside, stripped of her clothing and discarded like trash. The medical examiner determined she had been manually strangled, her hyoid bone fractured, a signature of Bundy's escalating brutality. This crime was different. Kimberly wasn't just another victim in a long line of murders. She was the final piece of evidence that would condemn Bundy to death. Her youth, the public outcry, and the sheer recklessness of snatching a child from school in broad daylight left no room for doubt. When investigators traced the white van back to Bundy and matched fibers from the crime scene to his stolen vehicle, the noose tightened. Kimberly's murder wasn't just another kill. It was the fatal mistake of a predator who had lost all control. Her death ensured Bundy would never walk free again. The killing spree that had terrorized multiple states for nearly 4 years came to an abrupt end, not through brilliant detective work, but through a simple traffic stop, one that revealed the monster hiding in plain sight. On the morning of February 15, 1978, just 6 days after Kimberly Leach vanished from her school in Lake City, Florida, Pensacola, police officer David Lee spotted a white Dodge van weaving erratically through a residential neighborhood. The driver's behavior was suspicious, slow, deliberate, as if casing the area. When Lee activated his lights, the van initially pulled over, then suddenly accelerated, leading to a brief chase before the driver surrendered. The man behind the wheel identified himself as Chris Hagen, but his nervous demeanor and shifting story immediately raised red flags. Officer Lee ordered him out of the vehicle for further questioning. As Bundy stepped out, his polished charm faltered, his hands trembled, his voice wavered. A search of the van revealed a killer's toolkit: ropes, a ski mask, gloves, and, most damning of all, Kimberly Leach's student ID card tucked beneath the passenger seat. Bundy tried to talk his way out of it, claiming he had borrowed the van, that he didn't know how the ID got there, but the evidence was undeniable. His fingerprints matched those from the Chi Omega crime scene. Witnesses placed him near Kimberly's school, and when forensic specialists compared his teeth to the bite marks on Lisa Levy's body, the match was irrefutable. The man who had evaded capture for years, who had slipped through the fingers of law enforcement twice before, was finally cornered. The reckoning had begun. The killing spree was over, but the nightmare for his victims' families was just beginning. On June 7, 1977, while awaiting trial in Aspen, Colorado, he executed his first audacious escape, granted permission to visit the courthouse law library alone, a privilege earned through his fake charm and legal studies. He leaped from a second-story window, landing in a bank of snow before vanishing into the night. For 6 days, he evaded hundreds of searchers by hiking through mountain wilderness, stealing food from cabins, and even attending parties in Aspen, disguised as a tourist. Recaptured and placed under heavier security, Bundy somehow slipped away again on December 30, 1977, this time in even more spectacular fashion. Over weeks, he had painstakingly carved a hole in the ceiling of his cell using a stolen hacksaw blade. On New Year's Eve, as guards celebrated below, he squeezed through the narrow opening, changed into street clothes stolen from the jail's storage room, and simply walked out the front door. This escape lasted longer, 2 months of freedom, during which he made his way to Florida and committed the Chi Omega Massacre and Kimberly Leach murder. Each escape revealed Bundy's terrifying blend of intelligence, patience, and sheer audacity, traits that made him one of the most dangerous fugitives in American history. Yet they also exposed his fatal flaw, an arrogance that would ultimately lead to his downfall. The courtroom in Miami's Dade County Courthouse became a surreal stage in June 1979, as Ted Bundy, the most notorious serial killer in American history, stood trial for the Chi Omega murders. What unfolded was not just a legal proceeding, but a disturbing spectacle that laid bare Bundy's narcissism and the public's macabre fascination with evil. Against all advice, Bundy chose to serve as his own attorney, a decision that revealed both his arrogance and his legal acumen. Dressed in conservative suits, with his hair neatly trimmed, he cross-examined the very survivors he had attacked, including a still-bandaged Kathy Kleiner. In a chilling display of audacity, he asked her to demonstrate for jurors how she had raised her arms to block his blows, forcing the young woman to relive her trauma before the court. His questioning of forensic experts was equally calculated, attempting to poke holes in bite mark evidence and crime scene analysis with the precision of someone who knew exactly how the murders had been committed. Outside the courtroom, a bizarre phenomenon emerged. Dozens of young women, some bearing an eerie resemblance to his victims, flocked to the trial, exchanging smiles and flirtatious glances with the killer. They packed the gallery daily, passing him love notes and marriage proposals during recesses. Forensic psychiatrist Dorothy Lewis later explained this as hybristophilia, a sexual attraction to violent criminals. But to observers, it represented something more unsettling: America's inability to reconcile Bundy's handsome, charismatic facade with the monster beneath. The trial reached its climax when prosecutor Larry Simpson presented the most damning evidence: the plaster cast of Bundy's teeth, which matched the bite marks on Lisa Levy's buttock with horrifying precision. As the photos of Levy's brutalized body flashed across the screen, even Bundy's composure cracked. He averted his eyes, his face draining of color. On July 23, 1979, after just 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. When Judge Edward Cowart sentenced Bundy to death in Florida's electric chair, he delivered a now infamous monologue: "Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity." The words underscored what made Bundy's case so unsettling. Even those who condemned him couldn't help but acknowledge his unnerving charm and intelligence. As guards led him away, Bundy turned to the cameras and winked. The performance was over, but the legend and the reckoning had only just begun. As the clock ticked down toward his execution, Ted Bundy, who had spent years denying his crimes and manipulating the legal system, finally abandoned the charade. In a series of startling interviews conducted over 150 hours with FBI Special Agent Bill Hagmaier and other investigators in the days before his death, Bundy offered fragmented confessions that peeled back the layers of his monstrous double life. Speaking with eerie detachment, he admitted to at least 30 murders across 7 states, though the true number likely stretched far higher. What emerged from these tapes was a chilling psychological portrait. Bundy frequently referred to himself in the third person. Bundy did this. Bundy thought that, as if dissociating from his own actions. He described his crimes with clinical precision, detailing how he selected victims, the methods he used to lure them, and the ways he disposed of bodies. Yet he remained emotionally detached, never expressing genuine remorse. His most infamous quote, "We serial killers are your sons, we are your husbands," laid bare his central deception: the banality of evil, the monster who looked and acted like everyone else. The confessions were strategic, delivered with the same manipulative calculation that had defined his life. Some details seemed designed to cement his legacy as a criminal mastermind, while others, like his sudden claims that pornography had made him do it, appeared tailored to conservative political agendas of the time. Yet beneath the performance, there were moments of unsettling honesty. He admitted to revisiting dump sites to have sex with corpses, described keeping victims' heads as trophies in his apartment, and coldly recounted how he sometimes strangled women slowly to prolong their terror. These final interviews provided closure for some families, but raised more questions than they answered. Even in confession, Bundy remained a puzzle. A man who could articulate the horror of his actions, yet seemed incapable of truly understanding their weight. The tapes became his last performance, a final act of control before the state took his life. The final hours of Ted Bundy's life unfolded with the same eerie duality that had defined his existence, part calculated performance, part unraveling psyche. As dawn broke over Florida State Prison, the man who had spent a decade manipulating the legal system found himself with no more moves to make. He had refused a last meal, chain-smoking cigarettes through the night instead, his once polished demeanor cracking during frantic phone calls to investigators where he dangled new confessions like bargaining chips that no longer held value. In a last-minute meeting with an evangelical minister, the serial killer who had never shown remorse finally exhibited something resembling fear, his hands trembling as he clutched a Bible he hadn't opened in years. At 7:06 a.m., guards escorted Bundy into the execution chamber where Old Sparky, Florida's aging electric chair, awaited. Witnesses noted how his carefully maintained facade had deteriorated. His normally impeccable hair hung limp with sweat, his tailored suit replaced by a standard prison uniform. As leather straps secured his arms and legs, the man who had spent years controlling every narrative murmured his final words with startling banality. "Give my love to my family and friends." Then the black leather mask descended, cutting off his famous piercing gaze forever. When the first 2,000-volt surge struck at 7:07 a.m., Bundy's body convulsed violently against the restraints, his fingers clawing at the chair's arms. A wisp of smoke rose from the electrode attached to his shaved leg as the current cycled, a nauseating detail several witnesses would never forget. 2 more surges followed before the prison doctor pronounced death at 7:16 a.m., ending one of America's most notorious crime sprees with clinical finality. Outside the prison walls, over 500 people had gathered in a carnival-like atmosphere that mirrored the grotesque spectacle of Bundy's life. Some cheered and popped champagne corks. Others sold morbid souvenirs like "Burn Bundy Burn" t-shirts. News helicopters circled overhead as if covering a perverse holiday celebration. The scene captured America's conflicted conscience, a nation that had spent years horrified by Bundy's crimes, yet remained hypnotized by the monster it had created. In death, as in life, Bundy left behind unanswered questions. His brain, preserved for study, showed no physical abnormalities. His ashes were scattered in Washington's Cascade Mountains, an ironic resting place near where his earliest victims had disappeared. The electric chair that killed him is now a museum exhibit, its wooden arms still bearing faint scorch marks from that January morning when justice, however imperfect, was finally served. Epilogue: The Chilling Legacy. Bundy wasn't just a killer. He was a warning. Evil doesn't always look evil. It smiles. It shakes your hand. It asks for help carrying books to its car. And by the time you realize the truth, it's already too late. The current switched off at 7:16 a.m., but the darkness Ted Bundy cast never truly lifted. In the silence after his death, an unsettling truth lingered, not in the ashes scattered across the Cascades, nor in the preserved slides of his unremarkable brain, but in the ordinary places he had haunted. The parking lots where women still glance over their shoulders, the college campuses where laughter dies just a little quicker when a stranger gets too close. The true horror wasn't just in what Bundy did, but in what he revealed. That evil doesn't announce itself with a snarl, but with a smile, a borrowed textbook, a cast on an arm, The crowds outside the prison dispersed. The souvenir sellers packed up their Burn Bundy Burn shirts. The news cycle moved on. Yet somewhere, tonight, a car idles too long near a bus stop. A charming voice offers to help with groceries. And in that split second, before a woman decides whether to trust or run, Bundy's legacy lives on. The monster is gone. The fear he planted still grows. If you like this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking true crime stories from around the world. Until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant. This is Crime Tales Across Times, signing off.